Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to another Torah L'chaim with me, your host, Rabbi Anibal. Great to see some of you already connected this Thursday afternoon. I can see here Judge Rocky Pollock, who said, Rocky is expecting an exciting lesson. I feel intimidated now. Hopefully it will be exciting. And Paro Goldman is here, Priscilla Kerr is here, and I know on my phone to see who was in the chat before I opened it on my computer, and I see Karen Farkas and Shelly Chochinov. Welcome to the class, and I'm pretty sure we have more people connected. I can see the numbers here combining Facebook and YouTube. So if you have access to the chat, please say hello. I would like to know who is there. And it's always good. It's like, when you're in a physical classroom, you have the opportunity to see all the faces, even if there are people that they never talk during live classes, in-person classes, right? I guess this is Debbie Stern is here. Welcome. It's the equivalent when you have an online class. Some people never talk. They never use the chat. Some people sometimes they use the chat, and some people they really like to use the chat. Peter Petrenko, welcome. Today we are going to study Parsha Vayikra, which is the beginning of the book of Leviticus. It's the first Torah portion of the book of Leviticus. Andrea Royave is here. You're not late, Andrea. I haven't started yet. So far, all I said was hello. Clyde Hertig is here. From the mountains in Adero Canyon in Arizona. Very nice. So, again, Vayikra. This book had multiple names. In English, we call it Leviticus. Why? Because it's talking about the Levites. Basically, about what the Levites did in the sanctuary. But you will say, hey, hold on a minute, Rabbi. It's mostly talking about the Kohanim, the priests. Well, but you have to remember that the Kohanim themselves were Levites. The priests were just one branch of the Levite tribe, the one coming from Aaron. Up to that point, Aaron himself, he was a Levite, right? But from that point and moving forward, God decided that all the Levites coming from Aaron will not be called Levites. They will be called Kohanim, priests. But they're still, technically they are Levites. That's why this book is called Leviticus. Now, in Hebrew it's called Vayikra. There is nothing esoteric or hidden or special about that word. It's simply the first word of the book. So sometimes that's what we do. We call it the parsha or the book, taking the first word of the text. Howard is here. Welcome. So yeah, this is today's Vayikra, but it has another name that we also use in Hebrew. That is called Torat Kohanim, the instruction for the priests. I guess it's the closest thing to Leviticus, right? But we call it Torat Kohanim. And it has a few things that it's a very interesting book. Some people find it a little bit dry when you start reading because lots of description of sacrifices, which it may have been very useful and meaningful for people back in biblical times or even during the temple times, where they needed to know what to do at the temple or what to expect if you were visiting the temple. If you want to present a sacrifice, you will need to know what to expect there. What kind of animal should you bring? Yeah, sometimes it's mentioned goats or rams, but what could be a newborn, could be an older animal, and so forth. So many details that this book was very necessary. Hello, Randy. Welcome. Once the temple was destroyed, many of the things that we read in the book of Leviticus are kind of obsolete. Let's put it that way, because we don't do this in the synagogue. We don't have sacrifices. We still, in some synagogues, they still call up the Kohen and the Levite for the first and second Aliyah for the Torah readings. But beyond that, there is not much that we do to give certain roles to Levites and priests. Some synagogues we also do this kind of communal blessings for the holidays. You may have experienced this in Yom Kippur if you ever went to a synagogue that is a little bit more traditional, where everybody that is a Kohen comes to the bima and they bless the congregation. And there are some places where the Levites present in the congregation which will wash the hands of the Kohanim before that. Have you ever experienced that? If you did, please put it in the chat. I would like to know if you ever had an opportunity to do that. I did experience that in my former shul in Chile. Even though it was a conservative synagogue, it was very traditional, so they used to do that. Do they still do it? I don't know. I kind of lost touch of what kind of service they have in these days, but they used to do it back in the day for Yom Kippur. I remember that. Yeah, so many of those things are coming from the book of Leviticus. So, but other than that, trying to find messages within the book of Leviticus that they are meaningful for us in the 21st century could be a challenge sometimes. Depends on the parsha. Some of the parts of the book of Leviticus contains lots of laws or regulation that goes beyond temple times. For example, love your neighbor as yourself is coming from the book of Leviticus, has nothing to do with sacrifices. So, but talking just in general. Clyde, you said yes, you experienced that in Beth Israel in Edmonton. Okay, welcome, Renazen. Welcome to the class. Karen Farkas says, our Kohanim go to the bima, but I'm not sure about hand washing. Okay. See, it's because again, it's a tradition. It's not the official blessing that is mentioned in the Torah. It's a representation of what it used to be. You know what I mean? Remember when I explained last class about the half shekel? It's not that we give the half shekel in these days. We give a donation in commemoration of the half shekel. Same thing with the blessing of with the Kohanim. It's not that the official blessing of the Kohanim, we do it in remembrance of the official blessings that used to happen in temple times. Okay? So, but I want to talk to you today about the very beginning of the Parsha. If the first word of the Parsha is good enough to name a book, I was thinking maybe the first word of the Parsha is good enough for me to teach you a message today. So let's see what we find at the very beginning, the very opening of Parsha Vayikra. So here you have it. It says, Vayikra el Moshe, Vaydaber Adonai elav me'ohel moed leimor. Okay, let's see what we have here. Adonai called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying. Now, lots of things here. First, we have to remember what was the Ohel Moed. Have you ever heard that word? Ohel Moed? The tent of meeting? Shelly Chochino said they still do that at the great synagogue in Jerusalem. Yeah. In Israel, of course, it's very common. Yeah, but what is the tent of meeting? Who knows that? Who knows what is the tent of what was the tent of meeting? The Ohel Moed. Ohel, even in this day, modern Hebrew, Ohel means tent. If you go out camping, you take an Ohel with you. Okay? Which is interesting because Ohel is also used for a kind of this mausoleum at cemeteries. For example, if you go to the grave of the last Lubavitcher Rebbe, he is buried, and the burial site is called the Ohel. But it's not Ohel in the context of a tent. It's more like a memorial place, like a shrine or something like that. It's also called at Ohel. But here is a literal tent. So Karen Farkas says, tent of revelation. Yeah. Tent of meeting doesn't tell us much about the what happened there. Tent of revelation gives you a little bit more clues. It was a place where God will instruct Moses. So remember, so far we have the revelation on Sinai. It was a big revelation. It was to Moses and to the Jewish people. But from that time on, from that time forward, every time God wanted to communicate new laws to Moses, all that will happen inside the tent of meeting. That's why it's called meeting. It's when God and Moses will meet each other. And then God will instruct Moses. Some will say that that was the time where God will dictate and Moses will will write it in parchment. And that became the first scroll of Torah, but by the end of the life of Moses. But everything happened inside the tent of meeting. Peter, that was the most important part, because it was necessary to establish this connection. And now the thing is, sometimes Moses was not allowed to enter to the tent of meeting unless God will call him in. That was the rule. That was the rule. Okay? So the beginning of this parsha makes that clear. That Vayikra, which means called, who called? God. God called Moses to come inside the tent of meeting. Okay? Shelley Chochinov, you said a sacred space. Yeah, it was a sacred space within a sacred space, but it was reserved at that time only for Moses. He was the only one who was allowed there, and only upon God's request. Okay? And then this is the interesting thing, because God will speak to Moses. Moses will come out, and then Moses will make public God's revelation. So I guess you kind of have to trust that Moses did have a conversation with God. Nobody else could hear that conversation except for Moses. So it involved a lot of faith. A lot of faith from Aaron and other people. Moses will enter to this room, then Moses will come out of the room and say, hey, this is what God said. Hey, do you have any proof? No, I don't. You have to trust me. And I guess every single miracle that happened up to that point was enough for people to trust that whatever happened inside the tent of meeting was real, and that was a representation of the will of God. That's what it says here. Adonai called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, what God said is irrelevant at this point, because it will be many sayings all along the Torah. Okay? Now, there is also just a little trivia fact here, trivia Torah, that after the episode of the 12 spies, remember that the people of Israel have to walk around for 40 years. There was no revelation during those 40 years until the last year. So the last bit of the life of Moses was when revelation resumed. Okay? But lots of things are going to happen here. Lots of laws, lots of regulations coming from God to Moses. But I don't know if you know it there. I don't know how many of you speak Hebrew, but you can read there. I'm pretty sure I left it like that purposely, that there is a letter in the Hebrew that is smaller than the other letters. Can you see it? If you can see it, let me know in the chat if you can see that small letter. It's a letter Aleph, which is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet anyway, but it's not really important here. Okay? We are going to talk about that small Aleph, because that's going to be the main thing of the class. But before that, I want to tell you something that I don't know if you knew. According to Midrash Rabbah, listen to this. Said Rav Asi, why do young children begin the study of Torah with the book of Leviticus and not with Genesis? Surely it is because young children are pure, and the korbanot, the sacrifices, are pure. So let the pure come and engage in the study of the pure. Yeah, I can see some of you said, yeah, I can see it. Yes, I can see it. Very good. Karen Farkas. Oh, okay, you have an explanation. Keep it there. I will talk about that in a minute. But first, I wanted to tell you this. I don't know if you knew this, that according to Jewish tradition, the first book the children study is not Bereshit, Genesis, but the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus. I will guess is one of the explanations is because it's talking about the sacrifices, and everything about the sacrifices is about purity. You will see the word pure and impure appear multiple times in the book of Leviticus. Everything was about preserving the purity of whoever presents the sacrifices. The animal has to be pure. The priest have to be pure. What if they are not pure? Well, they have to be purified by water or by time. Sometimes you have to wait certain time before you could be pure again. So the explanation is talking about the concept of purity so often that it says this is a perfect book for kids because they are pure. They are not contaminated by life yet. Let's see. Michael Legoff, Leviticus is also a nice summary of the entire book. I think you mean Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is kind of a summary of the entire Bible, right? Deuteronomy. Holly says, yes, the first word, you can see it as well. Very good. But just a little fact, remember, so and we start teaching the kids the Torah book of Leviticus. And do you know when? After the third birthday. You know the tradition? What happened at the third birthday of traditionally it was a boy. These days we do it boys and girls. What happened at the third birthday? I know the answer because I did it with my son. What happened at the third birthday? Let's see who's the first typing it in the chat, because I know many of you knows there is a special word we use for a special celebration of the third birthday. Haircutting. How do you call it? There is a special word for that, for the boy's first haircut. Meanwhile, I will explain. You're not supposed to cut the hair off your boy for 3 years. And on the third birthday, you will make a big ceremony about that. And that's supposed to be the kick off this boy's Torah study. The first thing you do is to teach the boy the alphabet, and you do it during the ceremony of the haircutting. Upsharing. Yes, Michael Legoff. Upsharing. 100 mitzvah point for you. Karen Farkas, close second place. Upsharing. That's what you do. Yeah, I did it with my son. It was a beautiful ceremony. And then you start teaching Torah to the boy. Okay? It's that's what you do. That's what you do. I don't know if you've ever been in one of those. It's very creative. There is no real protocol of what to do. So whatever you want to do is beautiful. Michael, go there with George as well. See? It's beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, so let's talk now about the Aleph. I don't want to spend more time talking about haircuts or anything like that. Let's go to the letter Aleph. We have a theory here. We have let's see. Where is it? Because Karen Farkas, you have a theory. And you put it there. Yes, my book explained that it is because the next word starts with an Aleph. Let's remind everybody what's going on here. You can see it visually there, right? That there are two Alephs, one next to the other. Vayikra and then El. Very good. Very good. That could be one explanation of why we do that. Amparo Goldman, you said, Aleph, the purity of young children, that the Shekhinah continue to abide in Klal Israel. Okay, but why would you do the Aleph smaller? You know, if you're trying to highlight the Aleph, you will expect that the Aleph will be bigger, right? That's a good question as well. So I want to, Debbie Pollock, you say Moses was modest and humble. Okay, yeah, but how is the Aleph related to modesty and being humble? Let me read for you a text that it was presented for one of the Lubavitcher Rebbes. It's a beautiful text, so I want to read it first, and then we will talk about what you said, Debbie. And by the way, welcome to the class. You've been missing for a while. Good to see your name again in the chat. Okay, let's read here. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch, who later became the third Rebbe of Chabad, entered the Cheder on the day after Yom Kippur in the year 1792, 11 days after his third birthday. Okay? So he's talking about here almost like a continuation. This is a story of a boy that is about to begin with his Torah studies, as I mentioned, because the boys start with the book of Leviticus. Okay? So this boy entered to the Cheder to begin his lessons after the third birthday. Following the lesson, the child asked, "Why is the word Vayikra written with a little aleph?" Very smart boy, 3 years old, asking that question. Wow. Okay. It's not that I can go and prove it, but I will take the words of the rabbis that preserve this story. For a long while, Rabbi Shneur Zalman sat in a deep meditative trance. So I guess it's almost like this Rebbe never heard any explanation that it will be appropriate for a 3-year-old child about the word Vayikra with a small aleph. It's very interesting. Very interesting. Trying to find... Remember what I mentioned before, that Torah has many layers. It depends where you're going through. Sometimes you see different things in the Torah. The Torah could become helpful to you. Depends what you're going through. Okay. In this case, the Rebbe starts thinking, what could it be meaningful for a 3-year-old asking this question? Okay. So, and then the Rebbe, after a while, after thinking, he explained, the first man, Adam, was the handiwork of God, and God attested that his wisdom was greater than that of the angels. Adam was aware of his own greatness, and this awareness caused him to overestimate himself and led to his downfall in the sin of the tree of knowledge. Okay? I don't know if I will talk to a 3-year-old like this, but I guess those were different times. I have to believe. But anyway, so I don't know if you understand this. What the Rebbe is trying to explain to the kid, he said, look, there was this man, Adam, according to the Torah, he was the first man, and he was very smart. He was very smart. He was so smart, actually. And he has so much wisdom that God noticed that Adam's wisdom was superior to the angels. And actually, that he was so smart that he made mistakes. He made mistakes because basically he thought he was smarter than he actually was. With all the wisdom and all the intelligence that he had, he failed to measure himself. He failed to recognize his limits. And because he failed to do that, it brought him some further problems, and eventually he ended up eating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Remember that? So, yeah. So this is the first part of the story. Let's move to the second part of this story. Now came Moses. And Moses was also aware of his own greatness. Okay? But this did not lead him towards self-aggrandizement. On the contrary, it evoked him a broken and anguished heart and made him extremely humble in his own eyes, thinking to himself that someone else had been blessed with the gift with which he, Moses, had been blessed, that another person will surely have achieved far more than himself. Thus, God testifies in the Torah that Moses was the most humble man upon the face of the earth. Okay, this is very interesting. I guess what the Rebbe is trying to explain here to this little boy is, look, I think you're very smart. You're 3 years old and you're already asking those kind of questions, right? Something according to story, this big Rebbe didn't even think about it. But this little boy, 3 years old, he noticed there is something special about that small letter Aleph. So the Rebbe said, you're very smart, but you have to be careful. Because being very smart could be very good for you or could be bad. Look, Adam was very smart, he failed. Moses was very smart, but he combined intelligence with humility. And that led to success. In other words, the Rebbe is saying to this little boy, congratulations for your intelligence. Let me teach you now about humility. Okay? Hello, Roberto Franco. Welcome to the class. Okay, so far so good. Let's continue. In the letters of the Torah, which God gave at Sinai, there are 3 sizes. If you read Torah, you will notice this. 3 sizes. The intermediate letters, oversized letters, and miniature letters. Okay? For example, as a rule, the Torah is written with intermediate letters. That's most of the Torah, signifying that a person should strive for the level of the intermediate man. Adam's name is spelled with an oversized aleph in the first book of Chronicles, chapter 1, verse 1. Why? Because his self-awareness led to his downfall. On the other hand, Moses, through his sense of insufficiency, highest level of humility, expressed by the miniature aleph of Vayikra. Okay, so this is just a midrash to explain the two different ways intelligence can take you. If intelligence is just intelligence, it will never be enough. Intelligence has to be combined with humility in order to help you succeed in life. We're going to read more about that. Now, going back to the Aleph at the beginning, and going back to what, where was it, the message? Debbie Pollack says, you see here, Debbie said Moses was modest and humble, and that's why he wrote the little Aleph. Well, there is a midrash that's saying that if you actually delete from the Torah that letter Aleph, it doesn't read Vayikra. You could read Vayikra, which implies 2 people encountering each other. So it's not that God called up Moses. They just casually, randomly encountered each other. In other words, Moses, according to the Midrash, Moses tried to write here, not that God called him, because he said, who am I to write in the Torah that God specifically called me and not the others, right? But in other words, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute, everyone. Sorry, I'm expecting a very important phone call. I have a big of a mess with water leaking upstairs. So as soon as I get this phone call, I think I will have to answer. So I will be please excuse me for a second whenever that happened. I thought it would happen right now. So back here, Moses tried to say, you didn't call me. We encounter each other. And God said, no, Moses, whatever I say, you have to answer. Now give me a sec. Sorry, guys. I'm back. Whew. I'm back. That's what I wanted to say, that I'm back. Abraham was also modest and humble. So back here, God said you have to write it. So Moses had to write it, but he reduced the letter Aleph. So God could never say not. Moses could never say God to God, but he also made a point here, as his intention was never to make public that he was special to God and God would call him and not others. And that's the midrash of the letter Aleph. But this is bringing us to a very important mitzvah in Judaism, which is the mitzvah of anivut. Have you ever heard the word anivut? Means to being humble. Being humble, we call it anivut. And that's because that's the way Moses is described in the Torah, as anav, as very humble person. Judge Pollack, you write it here. Rocky Pollack, it says, the lesson is control your ego. Well, I guess you're already talking about an interpretation, Rocky, because we are not talking about egos yet. We are talking about being arrogant. Being arrogant. And I believe that sometimes what we do is we find the root of arrogance on the ego. The ego could be the root of so many problems. But let's start first by describing the problem, and then we can try to discover the root of these problems. Okay? So let's go here and let's start talking about arrogance. Arrogance is illusory and not based on reality. It is an illusion contained solely within one's head, but objectively untrue. One who is arrogant is conceited and thinks more of himself than he really is. He is arrogant even without having any virtue over others. So here you can tell the problems with arrogance. And I believe that before we can start talking about anivut, before we start talking about how do we become humble people, we have to start talking about kind of the opposite, which is arrogance. And please don't say, well, arrogance, modesty, they are two sides of the same coin. No, they're not. They are two separate coins. What? Totally. They are opposite things. Okay? Opposite things. But here, let's spend a little bit of time talking about arrogance. You can see it here for the Malbim, this famous Rabbi from Ukraine, that he will say arrogance is in your head. All those feelings of superiority that you have, they're false. They're not true. They're not true. If you feel that you are superior than somebody else, it's your perception, it's not the reality. That's what he said. So this is something that we have to remove from our being. That kind of thinking. If you feel that you're superior to other people, you're an arrogant person. You're an arrogant person, and that is a distortion of your perception. Okay? Peter Petrenko, you said self-restraint while being powerful. Humility if self-restraint. Okay, very interesting. We'll talk about humility in a minute. Okay? Arrogance. Other ways we call arrogance is sometimes is pride. Right? Pride is when someone has a high regard for himself and consider himself worthy of praise. This is another thing. Here we start describing about characteristics of the arrogant. The arrogant likes people to praise him or her. And I'm sorry the texts are talking about him, because that's the way rabbis used to write, in the 1700s in this case. Okay? They weren't necessarily gender sensitive back then, but you have to make the conversion in your head. Even if the text says him, I'm talking about males and females. Howard, you also say lack of empathy. You see, now we started to see lots of things that the arrogant person will. Okay? Lots of things. But let's go back here. So the arrogant wants people to praise him or her. Let's continue. There can be many different reasons for this. We're talking about the reasons. Some people deem themselves intelligent, some handsome, some honored, some great, some wise. The principle is that whenever someone attributes to himself any of the good things of the world, he puts himself in immediate danger of falling into the pit of pride. And remember, this is one of the things that, according to the Midrash, happened to Adam. He failed because of that. I will say all of the above in this list. He thought he was intelligent. He thought he was handsome. Well, it's not that he had anybody to compare himself with, right? He was the only man back then. He was honored. Everything, the whole world was created because of himself, and right? He was great, and he was wise. But then you will see that all those characteristics didn't bring anything good. So if you buy into it, then there is danger of falling into the pit of pride, and we know the consequences of that. So let's continue talking about this, and I wanted to bring the opinion of a different rabbi. Right now, let's go to Rabbi Behaya Vad Yosef Ibn Pakuda. He said pride over spiritual assets can be divided into two categories, one negative and one positive. Now, listen to this. He's talking about spiritual assets. The form of negative pride is when a person is proud of his wisdom, or a righteous person is proud of his deeds, in a way that causes his accomplishments to be great in his eyes, to feel that he can make do with what he has already accomplished. Okay? To degrade other people, to look down at the great and wise people of his generation, and to be happy with others' shortcomings. Wow. And we know people like that. We all know people like that. People that they are happy when somebody else has failed. It's like the famous joke, right? That I saw it once in a fridge when I visited one of my friend's house, and it had a magneto in the fridge that it says, "If you cannot make me thin, make my friends fat." So this is the same thing. When when celebrate somebody else's shortcomings, it's that's a sign of arrogance. It's not a good thing. Okay, or when we like to degrade other people and we feel pleasure with that. Karen Farkas, you said, I think that arrogance comes from a lack of clear awareness and understanding of the world around oneself. Let me think about that one. Let's think about this. Arrogance comes from a lack of clear awareness and understanding of the world around oneself. Okay, but I think the arrogance is something that I wouldn't blame or focus too much on things around. I think the problem is inside ourselves. As the other rabbi mentioned, I can't remember which one, it says something that is happening in our heads, unfortunately, is the way we react to certain thoughts that cross our minds. And as I mentioned, who was said lack of control? Peter, you said self-restraint, right? We let those thoughts run our lives. We have all those thoughts and we let them run our lives. That's not a good thing. Randy, you said fear-based, one does not feel enough, so points out fault to others to build one's ego. Yeah, the word ego again. Yes. Yeah. Michael Legov, I always see arrogance as people who see themselves as better than others. Yeah, and this is interesting because you could be better than someone else. I don't know. There are certain things that you may have, your skills may be better than somebody else. And I remember, Michael, if I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, you were doing some kind of business, right? And I'm pretty sure that your business skills are way better than mine. That's a fact. That's a fact. But being more skilled than somebody else doesn't necessarily mean that you may be better or superior than somebody else, right? That's the problem. With sometimes we equal skills with superiority, and I think it also has to be with sometimes we confuse, we mixed up what we do with what we are. We are not what we do. Is that clear? We are not what we do. And I heard this many times that somebody will say, for example, with somebody's doing drugs, and you will say, you are not a drug addict. You're a human being that does drugs. You do drugs. You are not drugs. You know what I mean? Is we with the language, the way we use the language has lots to say about the way we behave in society, the way we label people. I think it's all part of the same thing. And sometimes one of the root of the problems is the way we confuse what we do with what we are. We are what we are. We are all children of God. That's what we are. We are children of God. And it has nothing to do with what we do. Regardless of what you do, you're still a child of God. That's very important for us to understand. Karen, you said, you said, if one understands what is happening in the world, it's hard to think of oneself as important. Yeah, but you see, you could be important in a society in the sense that you have an important position, but it doesn't make you better than anybody else, and that's when sometimes people don't understand. Very, very common mistake. And yes, but looking around what's happening in the world, we can see people that because of the position they have, they feel that they are better than others. And then we all see the consequences of that kind of thinking. Okay? And Shelly Chochinov, you say here, it seems to me that when one downgrades another, it comes from a desire to elevate oneself. Yeah, you have two ways, right, to be higher. Either you elevate yourself or you push somebody else down. It's of course. And Rocky, what you said, Karen, is right, a distorted notion of importance. Yeah. Okay, so now, but this is the interesting thing. And let's go back to the example of Adam. The Talmud doesn't leave it there. The Talmud said, okay, don't move away from that thought so fast. Let's talk a little bit more about that. What's going on here with the intelligence of Adam, for example? And the Talmud says, in Masechet Sotah, it said a person who has arrogance will eventually be rendered insignificant. Okay? And Rashi adds a few words there. Rashi said, from their important status. So basically Rashi says, if you're an important person to society, if you add arrogance to that mix, it's a question of time before you lose your status. Because eventually it's going to bring you down. It may take a day, it may take a few years, but eventually it's going to take you down. It's and that's something that we sometimes we see it. Okay, and in fact we're about to read something like that very soon. I'm talking about the story of Esther. What happened with Haman? Boo! What happened? Okay, let's read what happened. The commentators see in Haman the epitome of arrogance and the mindless pursuit of honor. This is a very, very good example. Haman. Have you thought about this? Listen to this. Listen to this. Haman had everything a person could possibly want. Money, power, a beautiful family, as is described in the book of Esther. Had a wife, kids, right? And prestige. He was second in command of Persia. The entire country bowed down before him, except for one Jew, Mordecai. Thousands upon thousands of people throughout 127 provinces paid homage to him. Yet Haman could find no rest because Mordecai the Jew refused to bow down. He told his wife, "All of this is meaningless to me when I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." That is the essence of the pursuit of honor. It is all in the imagination. There can be no second best. If he doesn't have everything, he feels he has nothing and can find no pleasure in all that he does have. Wow. I love this story. I love this story. I think it's amazing. It's amazing to understand what we are talking about here. And I think this is very important and that's why I wanted to talk with you about the topic of arrogance and humility just before Purim. Because it's a big part of the story. It's a big part of the story. Sometimes we talk about faith in God, we talk about miracles, right, when we talk about Esther and Mordecai, but what about Haman? What can we learn from him? This is what we can learn from him. He was a smart guy. Otherwise, how come he made it to prime minister of Persia? How come? He was smart. He had everything. But you know what? There had one thing that he didn't have, and he was obsessed with having that thing. And because his obsession, he lost everything. He lost everything. And this is something for us to think before Purim. Because sometimes we are always also obsessed with what we don't have in life. There are many things. It could be many, many things. And because of our obsession with what we don't have, we sacrifice everything that we do have. And sometimes it could be a good thing that we want to add to our lives. But sometimes it could be, hey, I'm intelligent. I have a great position in life, but I don't think enough people recognize what I do. So I'm miserable. No, that's not the way it works. Or I have recognition and people love me, but I don't have enough money, so I don't sleep at night. You see, sometimes it's all about learning what we have. And I believe when you are grateful of what we have, that is the beginning of becoming a humble person. Modesty, becoming a humble person begins with gratitude for what we have. Exactly what Haman did not have. And that's why every time we say the name Haman, we say, boo, because we don't want to become him. We don't want to become him. We believe that Haman was wrong in what he stood for. Yeah. So sometimes, again, it doesn't mean that we should not be aware of everything that is great in our lives, on our skills or achievements. Sometimes we feel that the humble person has no awareness of him or her achievements in life. That's for an arrogant to count all your achievements, and that's not true. That's not true. You have to be aware of your achievements, because that will also help you to achieve even more. You have to know what you're good at. It's extremely important. I believe that God sent each one of us to this world to fulfill a different role. If you never realize what you're good at, and you cannot keep track of what you do, then you also have a problem. You have to be aware of what you do. And for example, let me give you a few examples of this. There is a a wonderful thing here. Let me bring to you a text from Rabbi Twersky. He's a rabbi and also a psychiatrist. He wrote extensively about this topic, about humility, about arrogance, but also he writes a lot about never confuse humility with low self-esteem. I recommend everything written by Twersky. He's a great author. Even though I may not agree with everything he says, it's a good point to it's good material to have a discussion about very important things. So Rabbi Twersky says, just as the feeling of one's life having been futile is profoundly depressing, so is the awareness of that one's life is one of achievements extremely elating. This is why a sense of purpose in existence, a conviction that one is achieving one's mission in the universe, provides a true sense of joy as well as a feeling of self-esteem. Right? This is what the psalmist meant when he affirmed the commandments of God are just. They bring joy to one's heart. So it's very important for us. Yeah, Shelley, he said to be humble does not mean to be subservient. Yeah. So there is a balance. There are certain things you have to be aware, and you have to celebrate your achievements. You have to. Even if you are not where you want to be, doesn't matter. Every small achievement should be celebrated. Think about the Dayenu that we think on Pesach. Dayenu, Dayenu, where is a whole song counting partial victories, right? If it's only that we cross the Red Sea, if it's only the Shabbat, if it's only the Torah, we are grateful, right? It's celebrating the little things that we achieve along the way. But also knowing that every time we achieve something is not because we are great. Because if you start thinking that way, you become Adam. And we know where that ended. So that takes lots of self-awareness of all these feelings that we feel as well, in order to be able to balance them. So we won't become arrogant on our way of counting our victories and our achievements. You see, I will give you an example of somebody who was very aware of his achievements. This is an encounter between Saul and King David. Remember when David wanted to go and confront Goliath? So it goes like this. Saul said to David, "You cannot go to fight against this Philistine, for you are but a youngster, while he is a man of war from his youth." Right? And David said to Saul, "Your servant was a shepherd for his father. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went out after it and struck it and saved the sheep from its mouth. If it attacked me, I held onto its mane and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both a lion and a bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has blasphemed the legions of the living God." And David said, "God, who saved me from the lion and the bear, will save me from this Philistine." So many things going on here. Number one, you can see David says, hey, let me tell you, I am a skilled man because I did this, and that. And you will say, "Oh, come on, don't be an arrogant. How dare you telling me all what you did?" Right? But David says, "No, I did all that because God helped me." And you will find this many times in the Bible. When Joseph wanted to explain Pharaoh the dream, he said, "It's not me, it's God, the one who's going to do it." 1 second, guys. Yeah, sorry, guys. And I have to go, but I'm happy that we reached the last text for the class. We reached the last text of the class. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. I hope you're going to have a meaningful Purim, and the story is going to help you to discover all these hidden meanings of the book of Esther. You will become a humble person, and you will move away from the arrogance and Haman, and you will embrace the values of Esther, Mordecai, and even Vashti, that he stood up to the king, right? So happy Purim in advance to everyone. And next week, God willing, I'm working on it. I'm not promising you that I'm going to be able to do it, but I'm working on a whole class of Midrashim of Purim. God willing, I will be able to present it to you. So next Thursday, because it's Purim, we will be able to study Purim in a different way. Thank you so much. Hope to see you soon. Give us the thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel. Have a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.